Welcome to the Asking for a Friend podcast series. This podcast goes along with a series of messages that Pastor Alex is doing where we are tackling some of the big questions that we all have. We may not have all the answers, but we are committed to walking with one another through the uncertainties of life. Let's get into the conversation.
All right, we're good. What's up, guys?
What's going on?
Hey, thanks for helping me out. We are in the middle of a series called Asking for a Friend. And what we want to do is we want to sort of extend our time because there's a lot of questions that people have. And 20, 30 minutes, it's not enough to really dig deep. And so some questions have already come in, and I don't know that we'll be able to get through all of them, but we're going to be doing a few of these. And thank you for being the first ones on the podcast, and I really appreciate you guys. You know, some of the questions, why would a good God let a child die? Why would a good God let a child have a disability? What are your thoughts on pastors and celebrity pastors and spiritual abuse? Why do non-Christians prosper? Why can I live my life the way I want to and just ask for forgiveness on my deathbed? So those are some of the questions that we're going to be talking today. But before we get started, do you guys want to maybe just introduce yourselves? Maybe just tell us your name, how long you've been coming to LifePoint, maybe a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Addison Daniel. I've been coming to LifePoint 3-4 years at this point. I'm not sure on timelines. I don't know about me. I've got 2 kids, third on the way. I've got a job. I've got a family.
I'm glad you have a job. That's good.
I am too.
Good deal.
Yeah, I'm Justin Major. I've been coming to LifePoint since about 2015. Wife, 2 kids, a job.
Third on the way?
Yeah, no. It's good stuff.
Awesome. Good deal. So let's jump right into it. And I don't know if is there any one of those questions that I just mentioned that you guys want to maybe tackle first, or
just not the tough one.
Not the tough one? Okay.
Which one's that?
Which one's that?
All of them?
Well, let's talk about pastors, like celebrity pastors.
That's true.
And spiritual abuse. I think that's maybe a good starting point. I don't know if you have personally any experience with that. I know that a lot of people listening to this may have had. I had a teenager just recently that came to me after the service and said, Pastor, why is it that, there are people that may not necessarily believe, but they're good people that have good morals, good values, but they've just been hurt by the church and they've just kind of stepped away. Why does God let that happen? And so what is your, what would you say to somebody like that teenager who may have a question about pastors, celebrity pastors, and as it relates to spiritual abuse?
Why do bad things happen?
Yeah, exactly.
I know, because I really like, definitions and so for me, the celebrity word itself, it's like I want to always drill down more into that because do you mean popular? Because Jesus was popular, Paul was popular.
That's a good point.
There's several people throughout the Bible who were popular. So generally with that, I think popular is not the issue.
Yeah.
So it's the abuse of whatever that popularity has done that tends to be the issue. And I think the hardest part is a lot of it comes down to we're all human, and what happens sometimes is that popularity almost removes checks and balances. You don't, fewer people are questioning you.
You can get away with more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so unless you structure it in a way that as you are growing, you always have individuals who are right there next to you that you've given permission to be like, hey, what's this about? And can speak, into because when you don't have that, and that's when we do see that abuse, is it's just sin unchecked over time, and it creates, the longer it prolongs, you end up with worse outcomes generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly where like this person was coming from when they said the word celebrity pastor, right? Like, I don't know what they're, are they thinking about, like, are they thinking about like televangelists? Are they thinking about people who by their personality, they're loud, but what do you think, how can the church prevent maybe creating cultures within the church? Now, I'm not talking about just Life Point, but I'm talking about just the overall capital C church, where there's a good balance between the pastor being able to lead, but also not being so high on his horse that like he can, because one of the scary things for me as a pastor is, just the title alone gives you a lot of authority, spiritual authority. And you can really manipulate people, It's very easy, if you're not careful, if you don't keep your heart in check, it's very easy to give people a guilt trip. We've talked about that a little bit, before, like shame people from the pulpit and manipulate them. And so what are some signs, what are some things that you think a church can create to prevent that from happening? I mean, can it be prevented? If you have a pastor that's just unrailing, just kind of going crazy.
Sure. So, yeah. So it's always an uphill battle, right? Because of our fallen nature. What churches can do, to Justin's point, would be, some checks and balances, ways that the pastor himself is under authority in some form, some fashion, whatever that mechanism ends up being. And so, something of that nature. How it actually looks on a day-to-day basis in any given church, I don't know if there's strictly a prescribed method, but that needs to exist. Yeah.
What would you tell someone who feels like they have been manipulated or hurt by a spiritual leader? Like they're in that whirl, and maybe they don't know how to get out. How do they recognize that? I mean,
mm-hmm. So something that I've thought about is that I love Jesus. I have issues with the followers of Jesus at times.
Yes.
So recognizing it's difficult, right? Because you love God, you want to love God, and you want to be a part of what God's doing on this earth, and yet you see people that call themselves Christians, who are Christians. They are Christians, but as with any of us, they have their issues, they have their problems, and when those problems spill over from them and start affecting you, or start casting Jesus in a poor light, then you start questioning the institution, the implementation, anything like that, and it can be difficult to separate Jesus from his followers.
That's good. Justin, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think what I would say to someone, like if you're following Jesus, like if you love Jesus and but you've been burned, I think, go back to Jesus and see what he says about the things. Not that you should go back to the same place that burned you, right? But forgiveness is, we forgive because we've been forgiven.
That's right.
Not, it's not because, right, like the thing the person did or whatever, right? It's because Jesus loved us as much as he did, that no matter what we did has been forgiven. And so we choose forgiveness. Choosing forgiveness, as tough as it is, means approaching new situations afresh, like carrying, you can't carry that baggage with you.
That's right.
Because then it's a question of like, well, have you really?
You can try.
You can try, but then I mean, it's a question of forgiveness. Like if you're still carrying, and that's probably one of the hardest things that I know people have talked about dealing with, right? Like you have some serious things that have been done to people over the years, and I can't. For me personally, I can understand why forgiveness would be probably the hardest thing possible for them. Yeah. And so no judgment, but I mean that if you can get to the place of forgiveness, I think it's really easy, not really easy, but to get to the place where you're willing to step into another church or under the leadership of another pastor and be willing to give it another try.
And I feel like if you hold on to that bitterness or whatever it is, essentially you're going to end up hurting yourself because you're not going to have the benefits of actually being a part of a community that truly loves you for who you are, wherever you're at in life. And I think it could be the same. I mean, it's the same thing whether you've been burned in a dating relationship, marriage. You know, if you just say, I'm done, it's forget it, screw it, like you're going to miss out on you know, not every man out there is out to get you. Not every woman out there is going to, you know, hurt you. And so not every church is going to be. And so I think it's important to make sure that we don't, you know, just say, okay, it was like this then. It's going to be like that from again, now on. Yeah. What's that?
I was just finishing thought for sentence.
What about, so here's another question. Why do non-Christians prosper? Why do non-Christians prosper?
My take on this is you have fundamental, so just taking the financial, right? You have fundamental principles of money that, right? Like that it's how it works. There's a George Clason wrote the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, and it has like the 5 laws of gold. And it's, you know, you save 10%. I can't name them all. You know, I'd probably be pretty impressive if I could. But like the first one is you set aside 10%, right? Like now that's not referring to the tithe in that instance, but, you know, there's non-Christians, if they follow, you know, like you spend less than you make. You know, like there's a lot of things that if you just live, and honestly, most of this is found, like if you go to Proverbs for, you know, financial advice, like there's a lot of financial intelligence that exists, you know, in the Bible. But as any non-Christian can apply, you know, kind of the fundamental laws of money and be very prosperous, you know, like we've seen it across the board, you know, with all sorts of people.
Yeah. This might be a silly analogy, but I view it the same as the question of like, why would non-Christians be better at checkers than Christians? It's like, it's kind of the game we play.
That's right.
Like it's, so why would God allow that? I mean, for a lot of things, for me, it all goes back to free will and the fact that I believe that God allows us to make our own decisions, with the consequences that come with it. Yeah. And so,
I think the overarching interesting thing too is God's playing the long game, right? Like we're watching like this little snapshot of everything, and he's playing, like you think of the Pharisees, right? Like when when they're able to, the woman who gives 2 pennies, you know, and the other people who give just a smaller portion of their, right? Like, well, those guys needed the money and to give it so that Jesus could have that story in order to have, now we have verses in the Bible that teach us a concept, right? Like, but you don't see that unless you see the full, that means that person worked, you know, that rich person worked X number of days and they saved their money and they did this thing so that Jesus could really use them as a negative example, but it's the long game. Like,
you know, I wonder if that question, I don't know who asked the question. All of the questions are anonymous. But I wonder if, and this actually could relate to spiritual abuse too, right? I wonder if people, because of what pastors and preachers have said throughout history, if they equate God's blessing, prosperity, with faith. And I mean, I don't know, do you guys have anything to say about that? Like, again, I'm not trying to read too much into the question, but I wonder if maybe we've taught people that if you believe, if you do this, if you tithe or whatever, you automatically are going to have tenfold or whatever, you know. And I wonder if the question is coming from that perspective, it's like, hey, look, I'm doing what's right, I'm doing, you know, but I'm still struggling financially.
Right.
Thoughts?
So prosperity gospel where God will do this for you if you give him your money or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's problematic. It's difficult, right? Because to your point, yes, there's a belief or there's a teaching that if you tithe, that God will bless you. Maybe not financially, but maybe your car doesn't wear out as quickly. I can see kind of the same thing, maybe in a different light, where it's like, oh, you're sick? Well, you must not be doing the right things. Like, why did that happen? Like, why does
what did you do?
What did you do? Yeah. Why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
Like, kind of the opposite of.
Which will, that'll tie into some of the other questions you mentioned earlier. The idea, it's tying principles in the Bible together that weren't necessarily ever supposed to be. It becomes quid pro quo, right? Like,
right.
You do this,
then
you'll get that, and which it was never, right? Like the tithe is God gives you everything, you give him back 10%.
You're returning.
You're giving him back 10%.
Right.
Now we don't do that, right? We do that. It's same. We forgive because we've been forgiven. Like we give the tithe because we recognize he gave us everything we have. And so we give that back because he asked for it. And so we give it back.
And then we want more after that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you know, there's absolutely verses that discuss, you know, the blessing that can come from living under God's commandments and living as he commands. To, you know, like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be financially. And to recognize that, right, like the joy that he could give you simply because you're living that way, right? Like,
yeah.
And honestly, for a lot of people,
sometimes, you know, like peace of mind can be worth more than, more money per se. You know, I think it's also probably important to say that, like, we're not like the experts, like in, you know, like these questions.
No, I have a microphone.
You have a microphone?
Everyone should listen to me because I have a microphone. This is obvious.
You know, like a lot of these questions are hard, right? You know, Jesus, I think there's a verse where he says, you will always have the poor among you, you know? And so I think that there are things that we just don't know. But I think what's important, I think, in answering this question is making sure that people understand that, you know, just because you're a believer or a Christian doesn't mean that you're automatically going to prosper financially. And just because you're not a believer does not mean that, you know, vice versa, right? You're going to either prosper or not prosper, you know? And so sometimes we can over-spiritualize things to the point where it's like, what's in it for me? You know, and faith becomes this thing, this game where it's like, okay, if I give my life to Jesus, then what do I get in return? Because we're so used to the, you know, consumeristic mindset, you know, that it's like everything is, you know, one thing for another. And so, cool. All right, let's see. You guys ready for to get into a little bit harder one?
Sure.
Okay, here it is. I think of the 4 questions. I think one that's hard to explain is, why would a good God let my child die, or why would he let him have a disability? Not long ago, I did a funeral of an 8-month-old baby. Probably the hardest funeral I've done. And I asked myself that question, you know. There was no words I could say at that moment, you know, that that I felt like would be enough to ease some of the pain. I know people in our church have had children with disabilities, and so why would a good God allow those things to happen?
So I've shared this story in life group, but it's for me. Ryan and I were in Virginia, and she had a friend that she worked with who was like 8.5 months pregnant, like super close to having the baby. She hadn't felt the baby kick that day, so she dropped her other daughter off at our house and then went to go get checked at the hospital. And so when she got checked, the baby had died at that point. Mm-hmm. Now, before she left our house, she asked me to pray. So, I prayed over her that everything would be fine and all that. And then, as I said, like, that's how it ended up. And so for me, of all the prayers I've ever prayed, right? Like if I could pick one, God, just one, like that would have been it. So as far as challenges of my faith, like that was probably one of the biggest times that I was just like, okay, so what's up? Like,
right.
Why would you not? And we have all of these kind of it's the unfortunate easy answers that Christians are quick to give sometimes, that like they think it makes it better, but like it doesn't, right? Like, well, only God knows, and someday we'll get there and find out. It's like, well, I have words, like I have words for him right now. I want to have a discussion about this, right? And so where I land with most of it is the idea. It is it's a sinful world. Like, it's kind of the 3-prong when sin entered the world, right? So the ground became cursed, and we know that we're all going to die at some point, and God didn't tell us when that would be. And that doesn't make it any easier, but I think we understand, right? Like, that is life. Like, the amount of time that we get is unknown. And then you have the sin that enters. So the idea that somebody could kill somebody, right? And that could end your life. And then you just have the natural world that God established and set in motion that affects us every day. Those 3 things, are kind of the reasons why we could die. And we don't like that it's a child, but it affects a child the same way as, an adult, and it happens the way it happens. Yeah.
It's really difficult, going into this discussion, like having the notes beforehand. I tried to study to some extent. And I think, like, I have some cerebral answers that, kind of sound nice one way or another, but it to an extent ignores or keeps at a distance the actual suffering that something like that can bring to a parent, to a family. So, I mean, I'm not the source of any of these thoughts. I can't claim to have any fresh outlook on here, but what I found helpful was C.S. Lewis's The Problem with Pain, and just kind of the opening chapters of that help provide, at least me, a framework to understand reality, really, why we're here, why God allows things of that nature to occur. I don't claim to have the answers, and they kind of sound hollow in the face of something like that. So I think in those situations, kind of what you have to do is feel that pain, accept that pain to a great extent, and just know that, God does love. He does love you. He does love the child that has died. And I know it sounds hollow in the face of it, but that's the one thing that I can hold on to.
Yeah. I'd love for you to share anything that, like, if you research anything, any quotes or anything like that, feel free to share with us. But I think it's, with so many of these questions, I don't know that we can fully answer anyone who is going through it in the moment. But the way I look at them is my faith, I do believe, helps me cope with things in life. And so if in my mind I put my faith in a God who says, hey, if you kill so many people, you'll get, 7 virgins when you get to heaven or whatever, Some people believe that, and that's their God, and they believe in punishment and killing, and they believe in all of those things. For me personally, I choose to believe in a God of love, grace, forgiveness. And so the best way that I can, express, an answer to that is, we live in a broken world. Everything's broken. The weather's broken. Economy's broken. People are broken. Our hearts get broken from time to time. And Jesus came to restore our world. But in the meantime, it's not, there's not a fix for us here on planet Earth. I wouldn't say that to somebody that's going through it, but I think for me, mentally and spiritually and emotionally, that's, if I at least can believe in that, then I have something to hold on to, So I've never gone through any trauma like that. Have you guys ever been, other than what you shared, but anything like, have you ever lost a child or anything like that?
No.
Have you ever had anybody close to you that's gone through? See, that's what makes it hard, right? Like for me, I feel like, man, I haven't, when I see the state of the world, I see, man, all this suffering, and I almost feel like I'm in a little bubble, and I haven't really fully experienced what others have experienced. And so, anything else?
I mean, I like, it's the idea of permission, and I don't want the word permission to be angry, but I don't want the word angry to be mistaken, right? Like, because it's like when Job had his conversation with God in the Bible, he forgot a little bit about who God was when he had that conversation. It wasn't the fact that he had the conversation that was the issue, and like God rebukes him because of how he addresses him, basically. So long as you recognize still who God is in that moment, like have those conversations, right, in your prayers, like, and if it's why, just cry out why, like. Right.
I mean, even Jesus said that, right? Right. Why, Lord? Why have you forsaken me?
And it doesn't, the blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, right? Like, like there's, it's one of those, like, what comfort? Like, I would rather have my kid, right? Right. And so there's a lot of those verses that, we can throw out there, but I think have those tough conversations with God, like really, if anything, dive deeper into like your prayer and your conversations with him. In my experience, I've only come out the other side better for that, even though I was dealing with whatever tough thing I was dealing with. Not that it helps in the moment, but yeah,
it's good. Addison, anything to that?
No.
All right. Let's see, one more, and then I'm just going to ask just a few random questions, okay?
Oh, yay.
that you may not be ready for, but I think it'll be just for fun, okay? I don't know if this came from a teenager, but why can't I just live my life the way I want to, and then just, when I'm on my deathbed, ask for forgiveness? I mean, come on, if you're a teenager, that's a little tempting, I'm just saying. Let me party, let me have a little bit of fun, let me just do my own thing, be free. And then when I'm in my 60s or 70s or whatever, okay, I'll turn to Jesus then. So what would you say to maybe a young person that's debating, putting off Christianity and faith, and
It's a dangerous game.
You're playing a cosmic game of chicken. Like it's a bad idea. For one, if science tells us anything, it's that the male cerebral cortex is not fully formed until 25. That's why we can't get good insurance rates. No, I mean, can you? I mean, I assume some people have done it, right? But I assume many more have failed to actually do that. Because if you go into it with that outlook, it's like, tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll follow Jesus tomorrow. Yeah. It's like, tomorrow, well, tomorrow never comes. You only have today. You only have the present. That's good. That is why it is called a gift.
That's right.
Reference out there for anyone. So I wouldn't roll those dice.
That's the sincerity of it, right? Like in that moment, and kind of you get to the verses of talks about us trying to we're knocking on the door and I never knew you, right? Like that whole thing is just like you never, that life change was never personified in any way, shape, or form. Now, we have the sinner on the cross next to Jesus, right? Who that's kind of our greatest example of that, right? Like calling out for,
he didn't have to go through a whole process of like rituals and so it was immediate.
So to Addison's point, yes, it's possible. Not
recommended.
If you know when you're going to die roughly, then maybe, but it's missing the entire point that is like the wonder of a relationship with God, and and if you kind of miss that whole point, then, and it's the whole, like there is sin and we're not supposed to sin, but there's this whole like range of things that it's just like, the Bible specifically says like everything is permissible,
right?
But not everything
is
beneficial. So like we have the sins that are in there that it's just like, okay, like I know I shouldn't do this for these reasons, and God tells me why I shouldn't do that for those reasons. To sit there and like try to really, like, that question comes from a place of like, well, I just have to sit here and just do nothing with my life but pray and go to church and serve, and that's it. I never have any fun. I never, it's like when in actuality, like, read the Bible, like the fun that was had, right? Like by the disciples, the conversations, walking, the things that they did, serving people, the joy that it brought, like everyone. Like,
I feel like go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Peter got to cut off someone's ear.
That's it. I mean, it can't get any better than that.
That loose cannon, Peter.
That was fun. I guarantee you, that was adventurous. No, but like, I think the question. I think there is a misunderstanding that, like, if I believe in Jesus, then my life is going to be boring. Yeah. If I trust in God, then my life is over. And actually, I think that's a lie from the devil. I think you can have a blast and be a believer.
It's like, Christians are race car drivers. Yeah. They're professional football players. Yeah. Like, they're CEOs of giant companies.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's actually, if you could see the way God sees, you would understand, following God's word and what Jesus says about, what the guidelines that he sets out for us, it's for our benefit. It's for, it's for our peace of mind. It's so that, and at times it's like telling a child not to do something and they don't quite understand it. I always give the example of reaching out for the electrical outlet, and then they don't quite get it, and then you slap, their hand, and it's like, why are you a monster? It's like, no, I know better. I'm protecting you. And so, but yeah, I think when it comes to sex, alcohol, when it comes to Just anything that like where you're getting off track. I think God knows a little bit more. He can see a little bit further ahead than you, and he's like, man, just there is a way to enjoy life that's better than sometimes the way that the world makes it look like.
Right. And I think an interesting experiment for anyone thinking, what I'm going to try that, would be to go and find, a Christian, someone that you respect, admire, go to them and say, what do you think about this? Insofar as like, is there anything in your life that you did, in opposition to God? And what do you see that time of your life as now? I'm going to guess that most of the time they're going to say, I regret that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Sweet. Let's have some fun. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question that a teenager just asked me. Okay. A couple of days ago.
It's teenagers, man.
Yes, man. I'm telling you. So after the first service, she cornered me, and she said this. And I haven't given you, just for the sake of everybody, like you guys don't know the question, so I'm just going to throw it out there. If you answer this correctly, I give you $100, okay? Just kidding, but it's...
I'll hold you to it.
She stumped me, okay? Why does God not forgive fallen angels? She asked me that, and I was like, whoa, I don't know. Why does God not forgive fallen angels?
That question is making the assumption that there is a fallen angel asking for forgiveness.
That's good. That's a good way to put it.
And I think the pride that would exist in a fallen angel is such that they would never go back.
That's good.
On the decision that they made.
That's good. Man, that was good.
You're just changing the rules.
That's what you got to do, man.
You passed the pastor test.
Kobayashi Maru, man.
Okay. Did we record that? We're gonna put that one on the message. Cool. Addison, anything you want to add to that?
No, not that specifically. I mean, as long as we're on the topic of fallen angels, it had occurred to me, like in the conversation of celebrity pastor, etc. It occurs to me that it's actually the same sin as Lucifer did.
Yes.
Which that's where Lucifer was the worship leader in heaven, and he got envious of the worship that God was receiving, so he kept it for himself. And that is how ultimately he fell. It feels like the same application for a celebrity pastor or someone who is popular but doesn't use that popularity correctly. It's like they're only popular because of Jesus, or I guess practically they're popular because they look nice, or because like they can tell a good joke from a pulpit, etc. And they've built their ministry, but it feels...
It's a personality thing.
It's a personality thing, and people then follow them for their personality, not even because of the message that they're preaching. And so they're using God to build their kingdom and fall in that way.
It's good. That's good. All right. One more. A few of the questions that we're going to be tackling in the days ahead is, and I'm not gonna. You guys pick whichever of these you want to kind of maybe tackle, but a few of the questions that we will for sure be talking about. What does God say about abortion? Now it's a big deal, so we're going to be talking about that in the weeks to come. What should the church's role be in politics? Another phenomenal question, I think. How can I trust the Bible? How can I trust what the Bible says when there are so many interpretations, so many voices that contradict each other? Is hell real? Why would I want to go to a church full of hypocrites who look down on me for my sins, all the while doing the same or worse? So do you want to answer any of these? So there's a bunch more. Why are present day miracles not quite as unbelievable as in Bible times. All right, so pick one of those.
Of the ones you mentioned, I personally, the church's role in politics is the one I would rather answer than all the other ones.
Let's go there. It's a good one. We can wrap up with that.
Because I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of amazing things about the country we live in, but because the way the church partially formed the country, right? Freedom of religion was the reason why, they wanted to come over here. And it informed a lot of things, but because it was so integrated for so long, and obviously all of this is my opinion, what has happened is it has made, for some church members, that their political affiliation is synonymous with their identity in the church. And our identity's in Christ. Right? Like, period, and stop, like, period. Like, that's it. Our identity's in Christ. And what happens is when part of your identity is held in whatever political party, you lose, and you start making decisions based on that and not out of grace, love. A lot of the things, because at the end of the day, if you look at what, like, Jesus was calling for us to do, they don't line up with either political party, if we're honest, right? Like, it is foreign to what the government may or may not do. And so it calls into question, why have we allowed, or do some churches allow to be so tied to a political party that it would cause those issues? That was a lot of words for maybe not landing on a defined square.
But. I like that.
I just saw you as Neo dodging all the bullets. Congratulations. Yay. Now I'm going to take a hard stance. No, I mean, yeah, I agree. I think that, again, kind of a difficult topic one way or another. Yes, there should be, I think that our role in society should be informed by our convictions and our belief in Christ. And I think that can look different for different people, practically. So you take one individual out of a crowd and ask them their position on 10 different topics. They're probably not going to align before politics became the primary driver and orientation for Christians in the church. They're probably not going to naturally align with any one individual political party.
Right.
And so what you end up getting is like, I kind of like these people, or I kind of want to vote this way, but there's that one issue that I don't really agree with. So that means I've got to, swing wildly either one way or the other. I have to pick the lesser of two evils, which is, it's just problematic. Like, we need to think complexly about the issues of the day and how we think that our beliefs should be applied in society as a whole, and not demonize someone else for having a different opinion.
Yes. Yeah. So I think, if I'm not reading you wrong, you're both saying there's a line that pastors, churches shouldn't cross. Am I like, let me ask it like this. Is it okay for me to have somebody that's running for a political office, to mention their name, to give them 5 minutes of maybe prayer? Is that a line that should not be crossed, in your opinion?
I mean, if you want to cross that line, technically you can. You'll lose your charitable status.
Right.
Because churches operate under As charities, in the eyes of the federal government, and charities cannot endorse any individual candidate.
Right.
And
yet some churches do it, right? Some churches.
everything. Well, not legally, and so then they're going against the laws of the land.
So if it had nothing to do with the legality of it,
just praying over a candidate on a Sunday.
Yeah, like there's ways around it, right? Like there's ways around.
May the Lord bless and keep the czar far away from us.
But in your opinion, like that's a no-no, right?
I mean, if the church wants to drop its charity status, then I see no moral reason against it. But
how about you, Justin?
Let's not think of it as persecution.
If we're talking,
what do you mean by that? Like persecution, and like what do you mean? Like,
so there would be those, or I assume there would be those that would say, well, we're being persecuted because we can't endorse the candidate. Well, what you're really saying is we like our money. Like, drop your charity status. If you want to have those opinions, you can.
right.
You just got to drop your charity status.
Right.
Like to function ethically.
Yeah.
Maybe not morally, but ethically in, society. You
Yes.
have to do that.
Right. Justin?
if it's from the stage, that's where it gets a little bit different. Like personal support is one thing, from the stage is it becomes different, just in that, what God wants, or as the pastor's praying through kind of what God is telling him, what I have a hard time believing that God is ever like, it's this political party, pastor, like you
right.
need to give, because I'm going out on a limb, but I don't think God cares. From a big picture, right? Like in the grand scheme of everything, and he knows how everything's working, he does not care about the political parties, nor do they mean anything to him. What his people are doing means something to him, and how they're living for him. So I think generally it would probably be best, for the church to not deal in that, in order to serve the community, the people that they do serve, as best as possible. Because the second you kind of toe the line, you've automatically shunned or, said like, we do not align. That's the biggest problem I find with, if you tell somebody you're a Christian, the automatic assumption, right, is Republican.
Yeah.
Or
right.
You're non-Christian. They like some
one of the questions,
on the other side.
One of the questions is, can Democrats actually go to heaven?
Well, no. I'm confused.
But that's that's where it becomes an issue, because by doing that, you've essentially said, you've made something that, like, Jesus was polarizing in the best way.
That's right.
And doing that with politics makes you polarizing, in my opinion, in not the best way, if not a bad way. It's why, like, you should not discuss that, like they say, like, don't discuss
Politics and religion.
Politics and religion,
Don't do that.
So for the most part, I think we are able to, I like what you said about, you still need to be informed, right? Like, you still, like, operating in society, like the Bible, we're still called to function in society, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? Like and so there are things like we probably should do,
right?
But all the while testing it by how God tells you to do those things, not how your political party tells you how to do those things.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think, you never see Jesus campaigning for, in his day and age, it was a time of political struggles with the Romans and, all of, the Pharisees and all of that. And yet you don't see him, going, campaigning for anybody. So I agree with you guys. I'm not kind of pressed in a little bit. But yeah, I personally, my personal stance is, I just want to be known for what I'm for, not what I'm against.
Yeah.
And that's Jesus and God's word. And so there's plenty in there to say. And I think people can make their own decisions as far as, who to choose, what party to vote for. And so, that I think for me, I would not feel comfortable. I've been asked, hey, would you mind having somebody pray over this group of people? We have an opportunity. And and this is recent, a few months ago. And I just said, look, personally, like, I would rather not, even it was just a small prayer. They would just pray over a group of people. And I don't want to be super specific with which group, but would you mind if this person comes and pray over this group of people? And that's like, and I was trying to be sensitive, but I said, no, I'd rather not, So, and, I don't know. I'm sure there's other opinions and I respect those, but that's just my stance,
Well, and I think too, what happens is there will be one party or the other is championing a cause that you feel a personal conviction over. So you try to align behind that. When I've always, it's when you sit there and you have this conviction yourself, right? And then you're delegating the Great Commission. Like we've talked about this before. If God has put something on your heart, like champion that. Like, is it going to be difficult? Yes. Like I can guarantee, like ask anyone who started a charity or done anything that's like worked countless hours. Like, yes, it is hard, but if that is what you want to see done, push to that, and don't just expect a political party to do that, right?
I totally agree. I think that this kind of lines up with I just asking God for discernment on like, when do you tackle I don't know if political an issue like that's in culture, that's always a hard one for me, because there are some pastors that like everything is an issue, anything that's on the news, whatever's trending, boom, they're going to preach on that. They're going to, it's going to speak loud and bold on it, and for me, it's just like, okay, where is, I'm just curious, what, what's a good balance to not ignore the issues of the day, but not jump on them every time something new comes, your way. And so I don't know, any thoughts on that? And we'll probably wrap it up with that, but.
Sure. I mean, I do think that the church should be speaking into the issues of culture of the day. I think that frequently what happens is the capital C church doesn't speak on it. Mm-hmm. And then the Christians come out on social media or anything else, and the loudest Christians come out on social media, and then that's what the big C church is known for, is these opinions. So it's like, I don't admire your position.
Me neither.
But yeah, to speak against, because politics and religion are so intertwined, it's difficult to go against the political and to speak to issues from the Bible's perspective without even alienating your own congregation.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be better than that. We've got to think complexly and critically about issues, understand that other people can have different opinions, and they are still Christians. They're still going to heaven. Democrats are going to heaven.
And that, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the goal with this podcast. In fact, with this series, is to create some space for people to have different opinions, and I hope that even in the next few podcasts and with some of the questions that we're going to be tackling in the future, I hope that we can cultivate conversations where there's respect and where we care about people more for who they are than necessarily a point of view that they may have, And so, any last words, Justin, Addison? Thank you guys for being here, man. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
It's been fun. Anything else?
No,
We're good?
I think we're good.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. More than that, we hope you feel encouraged to have conversations with people in your life about potentially difficult topics. Also, it's never too late to send in a question. Text us your questions to 903-592-8357. Thanks for listening.